They never asked what I did. Not because they didn't care, but because they had already made up their minds. I was the cousin who gave up a real career, the one who chose a path they didn't understand. A digital dreamer, dabbling in some remote freelance gig. Far from the polished boardrooms and family legacies they cherished. The Whitaker family Christmas party was a ritual. A grand event held every year at my grandfather's vineyard estate. Golden fairy lights shimmered softly against the stone walls. Tables were laid with embroidered place cards, carefully arranged next to overpriced hors d'oeuvres. The kind of luxury that's meant to impress, and to remind you who belongs. Nathan was the star of the evening. Always the confident one. The golden boy. He held court near the copper fireplace, his voice pitched just loud enough to command attention. Every sentence was a carefully crafted announcement of success. The merger's basically closed, Nathan said. Once Gridstone finalizes the deal with Vidian Tech, I'll be stepping into an executive innovation role. West Coast operations. Big picture stuff. He adjusted his blazer sleeve like he was already on the cover of Forbes. That's Nathan, brilliant at branding himself. Our family adored him for it. Aunt Claudia looked at him the way she used to when he won statewide science fairs. The way she looked when he dated governors' daughters in high school. The same look filled with pride and a hint of reverence. Meanwhile, I lingered quietly by the bourbon tasting station, sipping iced ginger tea from a whiskey tumbler, trying to stay invisible. Then Uncle Alton's voice cut through the conversation, syrupy sweet with judgment. Still doing that digital thing? Analytics something? The room turned just enough to glance at me. The cousin who had quit the corporate ladder to run a small consultancy. I smiled, keeping my voice steady. Still running my consultancy. Nathan didn't even turn around. Still working that remote gig, huh? How many team members now? 2. 3. 11, I said evenly. That was the truth. But I said no more. Let him think Luminina Insight was a boutique data firm building dashboards for Etsy sellers. Let him believe I was still the quirky cousin who left her job at 29 to find herself by the ocean. Nathan lifted his scotch glass, voice dripping with fake generosity. You know, Marissa, I could talk to HR at Vidian. Get you something real steady. He smirked. You're what, 37? Security matters. My mother offered a strained smile, like it was thoughtful. I gripped my glass a little tighter, the cold glass pressing against my palm grounding me. Because what no one realized, what no one could see, was this. A signed acquisition agreement was already waiting in my inbox. Luminina Insight had quietly secured a controlling interest in Vidian Tech. And in less than 48 hours, I would be the majority owner of the very company Nathan couldn't stop bragging about. I appreciate it, I said calmly, but I'm doing just fine. Nathan shrugged and turned back to his audience, oblivious. He had no idea how close the game was to changing. They never truly heard me. They heard only the version of me they wanted to believe. The lost cousin playing with numbers on a laptop. The freelancer with a glorified spreadsheet startup. But while they sipped their vintage scotch and boasted, I was quietly building something they never imagined. Something that would make them stop and rethink everything they thought they knew. Because sometimes, success isn't the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it's the quietest. And tonight, I was ready to prove it. Nathan was the life of the party. Or at least, that's how it seemed to everyone else. His voice cut through the warm hum of conversation like a spotlight on center stage. He held court near the copper fireplace, glass raised, boasting about the merger like it was a personal trophy. You should have heard the boardroom discussions, Nathan declared. The way Vidian Tech CEO and I strategized the next steps, it's revolutionary. Once the deal closes, I'll be stepping into a major executive role. West Coast operations, innovation, the future of the company in my hands. His words rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. The kind of smooth confidence that convinced the room they were hearing from a man destined to reshape an industry. Aunt Claudia was practically swooning, clutching her pearls like they were talismans. Uncle Alton nodded along, a smile frozen between pride and disbelief. But I stayed quiet. Watching. Measuring. To everyone else, Nathan was the winner. The golden boy. The one who had made it. The family favorite. But beneath that polished exterior was something I knew too well, arrogance. A fragile ego cloaked in bravado. Earlier, he had caught my eye and tossed a snide remark my way. "Still doing that digital thing, Marissa?" he asked, voice dripping with condescension. "How many team members now?" 2. 3. 11. I spoke it quietly, evenly, not to provoke, but because it was the truth. Yet I refused to say more. Why give him ammunition when his ignorance was so complete? Let him live in his fantasy where I was still just the quirky cousin tinkering with spreadsheets. There was a strange kind of power in letting him underestimate me. Because the real story, the one no one else saw, was far different. My mind drifted back to moments that still stung, sharper than any insult thrown tonight. Like last Thanksgiving, when Nathan dismissed my company outright. "In the grand scheme, it's just a glorified spreadsheet startup," he scoffed. Laughter bubbled around the table, but none of it was kind. Or the time Uncle Alton, ever the helpful uncle, had cornered me with a pitying smile. "I know you love your work, Marissa," he said, "but maybe you should consider something steadier. There's an opening at a firm looking for admin assistants. I could put in a good word." I had smiled politely then. But inside, I felt crushed. The message was clear: you're not enough. Not serious enough. Not worthy of the family's respect. Those memories were wounds that had healed on the surface but still burned beneath. Yet I never fought back. I didn't need to. I had something better, patience and a plan. Behind the scenes, while Nathan paraded his self-importance, I was quietly building an empire. Luminina Insight was no small venture. It was a global analytics and investment powerhouse, managing billions in assets across continents. A company that had acquired 17 firms in the past 3 years alone. And now, it was about to acquire the controlling interest in Vidian Tech. The very company Nathan treated like his personal kingdom. The acquisition papers had been signed days ago. The final agreement was sitting in my email inbox, waiting for the official announcement. That email was more than a document. It was my sword and shield, my silent victory over the years of dismissal and doubt. Tomorrow morning, the world would wake up to a new reality. One where I wasn't the sidelined cousin, but the majority owner and decision maker. The irony was delicious. Nathan could keep spinning his tales of grandeur tonight. He could keep imagining himself as the future of Vidian Tech. Because by morning, he would have to reckon with the truth. I allowed myself a small smile. There was no rush to crush his ego now. Let him think he still ruled the room. Let him believe I was the same woman he'd laughed at for years. Because when the veil lifted, the impact would be undeniable. I reflected on how often people mistake noise for strength. Loud words, grand gestures, and empty boasts don't build empires. Steady, strategic moves do. I had learned that the hard way. Every family dinner where my work was mocked, every snide comment and sideways glance, had fueled my resolve. I was no longer playing their game, I was rewriting the rules entirely. And tonight, I felt that quiet fire burn brighter than ever. Nathan's voice grew louder, his stories more elaborate, but I remained unmoved. The real victory was mine, already sealed in contracts and strategy. as he droned on about the CEO Raymond Choi's arrival. The anticipation in the room grew. "Guess who's showing up tonight?" Nathan said, voice full of triumph. "Raymond Choi himself. He's practically family now." The room buzzed with excitement. But my mind was already on the next steps. When Raymond walked in, he would see me, not just as the quiet cousin in the corner, but as the woman who had orchestrated a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. Nathan's smug smile would falter. His stories would lose their audience. And the family's assumptions, the ones that had boxed me in for so long, would shatter. The email sat unopened on my phone. But every unread message was a countdown to a new chapter. I thought about the many times I had been underestimated, dismissed, and outright ignored. How my ideas were passed over in favor of louder voices. How my quiet ambition was mistaken for lack of direction. But in truth, I was always moving forward, carefully, deliberately. This was not just business. It was personal. A vindication of all the years I had been mocked for, playing with numbers on Zoom. A response to the whispered doubts and barely concealed pity. I took another sip of my now warm tea, steadying my breath. Tomorrow, the family would see me in a new light. Not the lost cousin. Not the freelancer. The boss. The room buzzed with anticipation. Whispers and glances exchanged as everyone waited for the moment that had been quietly promised all evening. Raymond Choi, the CEO of Vidian Tech, was arriving. Nathan, of course, was ready. He stood tall, a smug expression etched onto his face as if the whole night had been building up to his grand entrance. He imagined the nods of approval, the admiring looks, the subtle deference from relatives who had always seemed to favor him. The family had gathered in the grand cellar of the vineyard, beneath the golden fairy lights and oak barrels that smelled of age and tradition. Every eye was on the entrance. When the door eased open, a hush fell over the crowd. Raymond Choi stepped in, calm, composed, the very picture of quiet authority. His tailored navy coat draped over his arm, silver hair catching the chandelier's glow like a halo. There was a moment of expectation, everyone waiting for him to approach Nathan, the golden boy, the future of Vidian Tech in their eyes. But then something unexpected happened. Raymond's gaze swept the room, scanning the familiar faces with a practiced ease. Then, without hesitation, he walked straight past Nathan. No nod, no smile, no acknowledgement. His eyes found me. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, voice warm and steady, extending his hand with a quiet confidence that filled the room. "Always a pleasure. Are we still on for tomorrow morning?" The words hit like a thunderclap. The chatter died instantly. Forks paused mid-air. Even the old oak barrels seemed to hold their breath. Nathan's smug expression cracked, then faltered. His voice came out shaky, louder than he intended. "Absolutely," he stammered, disbelief lacing every syllable. Aunt Claudia gasped, clutching her pearl necklace with dramatic flair. Uncle Alton's mouth opened, then closed without sound. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Raymond turned back to the room, his gaze calm and measured. "I wanted to personally express my appreciation to Ms. Whitaker for how smoothly the transition has been handled." Nathan blinked, struggling to process what was happening. "You know my cousin," he said, voice rising. "You know I'm the one." "Of course I do," Raymond interrupted mildly, but with an unmistakable firmness. Then, addressing the entire room, he made the declaration that shattered years of assumptions and whispered doubts. "Marissa Whitaker is the reason I'm here tonight." The room seemed to freeze. Glassware clinked softly as someone shifted nervously. Nathan's glass slipped from his fingers, falling to the floor with a dull thud that echoed like a verdict. It was a moment none of us would forget. For years, the family had overlooked me, dismissed me as a dreamer with a small digital gig, not worth serious attention. But here was the CEO himself, publicly affirming that I was the driving force behind this deal. Respect from an outsider, something my own family had never offered. Raymond continued, his voice steady as he detailed the precision and strategy behind Millionaire Insight's acquisition of Tech. He praised the team, my team, for executing the deal flawlessly, highlighting the careful timing, leverage, and regulatory preparation. This was textbook, he said, gesturing toward me with genuine admiration. Nathan flushed, his face a mixture of embarrassment and anger. This is some kind of joke, he muttered, barely able to form coherent words. Marissa can't, she doesn't have the experience to lead a global firm. She's never even stepped foot in a boardroom. His words fell flat in the stunned silence. I looked him squarely in the eye. Marissa Whitaker runs a global analytics and investment group managing over $12 billion in assets, I said calmly. We've acquired 17 firms in the last 3 years, including Tech, a $4.2 billion deal. The truth hung heavy in the room. The little company they dismissed for years had quietly become a powerhouse. And I was at its helm. Nathan's jaw clenched. His empire of pride and assumption was crumbling before his eyes. I continued, voice steady but firm. As for that bold vision you boasted about, we'll be reviewing all leadership roles this quarter. The room was silent. You could almost hear the gears of denial grinding to a halt. Raymond nodded toward me once more, respect clear in his eyes. This is the kind of strategic mind the industry needs. The family that had mocked, dismissed, and doubted me was forced to confront a new reality. One where I was no longer the quirky cousin, but the boss. And as the evening wore on, the dynamics in the room had shifted forever. The room was still heavy with silence after Raymond's words. Eyes darted between Nathan and me, disbelief, shock, maybe even a touch of envy mixed with something like grudging respect. Nathan's face was pale, his usual arrogance replaced by an awkward, almost desperate energy. He was the golden boy, the family's pride, and now, he was unmoored. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence do the work. Then Aunt Claudia, ever the embodiment of old-world expectations, broke it with a brittle voice. Marissa, why didn't you ever tell us? The question was less curious and more accusatory, like I had somehow been hiding a secret too big for the family to handle. I looked at her steadily. Because none of you ever asked. Because when I spoke about my work, you heard only what you wanted, just a remote gig, some analytics thing. Last Thanksgiving, Nathan called my company a glorified spreadsheet startup. Uncle Alton offered to introduce me to someone hiring administrative assistants. That's the respect I got. There was a murmur in the room, discomfort rising as the truth peeled back layers of family judgment. I took a breath, then spoke more clearly than I had all night. Millionaire Insight manages over $12 billion in assets. We've acquired 17 firms in the last 3 years. And yesterday, we completed the acquisition of Tech, a deal worth over $4 billion. The numbers seemed to land like a hammer on the polished veneer of the gathering. Aunt Claudia's hand trembled, her glass cracked softly on the table. Uncle Alton swallowed hard, finally breaking his silence. We were just concerned, he muttered, voice low. But concern without belief is just doubt, I replied. The truth was, I had never felt fully seen by my family, not the way Nathan was. Not the way Raymond saw me. And it wasn't just about money or status. It was about recognition, respect, and finally taking my place at the table. Nathan opened his mouth, but the words stuck. Instead, he clutched his scotch glass like a lifeline, the weight of defeat settling in. Raymond cleared his throat gently, redirecting attention. This is more than a business transaction, he said. It's about vision and leadership. Ms. Whitaker embodies that. The murmurs in the room shifted, some skeptical, others thoughtful. I seized the moment. This merger isn't just about growth. It's about changing the way video tech operates, with innovation, transparency, and a new direction. Nathan, you once said you wanted to lead the next era. Now it's time to prove you can evolve with it. Nathan's eyes flashed, the fire of rivalry rekindled. But I was ready. The board will review all leadership roles this quarter. It's an opportunity for everyone to show they can rise to the challenge. The unspoken message hung clearly in the air. No more assumptions. No more dismissals. The family that had mocked me would now watch as I rewrote the rules. As the night deepened, conversations turned more subdued, tinged with a new respect, or at least acknowledgement. This Christmas gathering would be remembered, not for the usual pomp, but for a reckoning. And as I glanced around the room, I saw something new, not just surprise, but the dawning realization that the underdog had become the boss. Nathan's confident smile had vanished, replaced by a strained, forced calm. But I felt something entirely different: relief, pride, and finally, validation. For years, I was the family's overlooked shadow. The cousin with the small business no one took seriously. The one who left a steady corporate job to chase a dream they all dismissed. But tonight, that all changed. I wasn't just running some quirky freelance gig anymore. Millionaire Insight had quietly grown into a global powerhouse, managing billions and acquiring major companies. And yesterday, we closed the deal that made me the majority owner of Vidian Tech, the very company Nathan had bragged about leading. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nathan had mocked me for years, dismissing my work as nothing more than spreadsheets and side projects. He offered me pity jobs, as if I couldn't measure up. But he never saw the quiet storm I was building behind the scenes. And neither did the rest of the family. But tonight, with Raymond Choi, the CEO of Vidian Tech himself, calling me boss, the tables turned. This wasn't about petty revenge or one-upmanship. It was about reclaiming my story. About proving that success isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's quiet, strategic, and unstoppable. Nathan's arrogance couldn't outmatch my preparation. His bravado couldn't overcome my focus. And the family's dismissive whispers couldn't drown out my accomplishments. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Never let others' doubts define your worth. Believe in your vision, even when no one else does. Build steadily and strategically, and when the time comes, your success will speak for itself. Tonight, I wasn't just the cousin with the small business anymore. I was the boss. And I was ready to lead. Because true power isn't about loud declarations or inherited titles. It's about resilience, patience, and knowing your own value, no matter what anyone else says. And as the night drew to a close, one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I define the rules. Where I lead with strength and vision. Where respect isn't asked for, it's earned. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest victory of all.